The night waters around Guadalcanal belonged to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Their destroyers had ruled these dark passages since the American landings began. But that dominance was about to face an unexpected challenge from an unlikely source. Inside the radio shack at Tulagi Harbor, static crackled through the evening air. The operator's pencil moved across the message pad. Henderson Field was reporting movement through the slot. Japanese destroyer force, multiple vessels, southeast bearing. Estimated arrival at Iron Bottom. Sound, 0200 hours. August had brought more than just American forces to the Solomon Islands. It had brought a new kind of warfare to these tropical waters. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2 had arrived with vessels that defied every convention of naval combat. These weren't the massive steel warships that had dominated ocean battles for decades. These were something entirely different, something the Japanese had never encountered before. Lieutenant Hugh Robinson stood in the humid evening air, studying the reconnaissance report that had just arrived. 4 boats would face an unknown number of enemy destroyers tonight. The odds seemed impossible. What nobody realized was that these small plywood vessels were about to begin something that would change everything. The Imperial Navy's confidence came from proven superiority. Night combat belonged to them. Their triumph at Savo Island in August had demonstrated this beyond question. 4 Allied heavy cruisers had gone to the bottom in just 32 minutes. Their Type 93 Long-Lance torpedoes could reach targets at 20,000 yards. Years of training had perfected their night fighting techniques. Darkness was their domain. Their optical equipment could pierce shadows that left American radar useless. Trained lookouts could spot enemies in conditions that seemed impossible. Admiral Yamamoto's strategy was elegantly simple. Own the night. Control the supply lines. Keep the garrison alive. The Americans might control daylight skies with aircraft from Henderson Field. But when the sun disappeared, Japan took command. Without those nocturnal supply runs, 30,000 Japanese troops on Guadalcanal would face starvation within weeks. The Tokyo Express had become their lifeline. Every 3 to 5 nights, weather permitting, Japanese destroyers would race down the slot. That narrow passage through the central Solomons had become a highway for survival. 4 to 8 destroyers per run. The route was predictable. Down the slot, around Savo Island, to beaches along Guadalcanal's northern coast. The supply system was crude but effective. Drums would be pushed overboard near the beaches. Soldiers would swim out to retrieve what they could. Only 30% typically made it ashore, but 30% was better than nothing. It was safer than attempting conventional unloading under threat of dawn air attacks. But change was coming to these waters. Change in the form of vessels that shouldn't have been able to challenge destroyer supremacy. The PT boats represented American industrial ingenuity pushed beyond rational limits. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2 had brought the first boats to Tulagi in August. Each Elco 77-foot boat displaced just 45 tons, 77 feet long, 20 feet wide, 5 feet of draft, shallow enough to operate where destroyers couldn't follow. Lieutenant Roland Westholm examined his vessel's armament as daylight faded. 2 twin 50-caliber machine gun turrets, 4 21-inch torpedo tubes, Mark 8 torpedoes that suffered from 50% failure rates, defective magnetic detonators, depth-running problems that sent weapons beneath their targets. The boats carried no radar initially. Everything depended on eyesight and sound for detection, human senses against electronic warfare. But the PT boats had one critical advantage: speed. 3 Packard 4M 2,500 cubic-inch engines generated the power. Each engine produced 1,350 horsepower. Maximum speed reached 41 knots in calm seas. 35 knots was more realistic under combat conditions. Japanese destroyers could manage 35 knots at best. In the confined waters around Guadalcanal, speed meant survival. The hull construction defied traditional shipbuilding wisdom. 2 layers of mahogany planking formed a flexible shell. Wood could absorb impacts that would crack steel plates. The entire boat could be built in 2 months. Cost, $263,000. A destroyer required 18 months and cost $8 million. Motor machinist's mate first-class Eldon Genter had spent 8 months learning every sound the Packard engines could make. A Detroit mechanic who had worked on the Packard production line before enlisting. Genter could diagnose engine problems by sound alone in complete darkness. These engines demanded respect. Wrong fuel mixture meant losing 200 horsepower. Overheating would throw a rod. But proper treatment would deliver speed when it mattered most. Genter had modified carburetor settings for Solomon Islands' humidity levels. He'd developed a pre-combat checklist, warming engines to precise temperatures, adjusting ignition timing for maximum acceleration, ensuring cooling systems could handle extended high-speed runs. His innovations kept boats operational when manufacturer specifications said they should have failed. Every modification had been learned through trial and error. Every improvement had been paid for with sweat and sleepless nights. Commander Kiyoshi Kaneda stood on his destroyer's bridge, leading 3 vessels down the slot at 28 knots. 20 years in the Imperial Navy had taught him to read these waters like a map. Every shadow might hide an enemy. Every phosphorescent trail could mark a torpedo track. Tonight's mission was routine but crucial. 800 drums of supplies for the garrison at Cape Esperance. The drums would go overboard near the beach. Soldiers would retrieve what they could. It was inefficient, it was dangerous, but it was keeping Japanese forces alive. The destroyer's advantages were obvious: size, firepower, armor protection. But those same advantages created vulnerabilities. At 388 feet long, the destroyer needed 800 yards to complete a full turn at speed. Her 12-foot draft limited operations to deep water channels. Her 5-inch guns couldn't depress low enough to engage targets closer than 300 yards. Against small, fast targets at close range, the destroyer's advantages evaporated. Traditional naval warfare assumed ship-to-ship combat at long range. But PT boats were rewriting those assumptions. October 13, 1942. 2,330 hours. 4 PT boats from Squadron 2 waited in the shadows of Savo Island. Engines muffled, running at minimum RPM to reduce noise and phosphorescent wake. No radio communication. Only hand signals and shielded blinker lights. Lieutenant Lester Gamble in PT-48 led the patrol line. The boats spread at 500-yard intervals. Watching, listening. Without radar, they relied on what sailors called the Mark I eyeball. Human vision adapted to darkness after hours without artificial light. At 23:47, lookouts spotted shadows against the horizon. 3 destroyers in column formation, making 25 knots toward Cape Esperance. The hunt was beginning. Standard PT boat attack doctrine called for approaching from different angles. Split enemy defensive fire. Confuse their targeting. But with only 4 boats and unreliable torpedoes, Gamble chose concentration. All boats would attack from the destroyer's starboard quarter. Fire torpedoes at 500 yards. Then scatter at maximum speed. PT-48 led the approach. Engines throttled to 1,500 RPM until reaching 1,000 yards. Then Gamble pushed the throttles forward. The boat leaped to 35 knots, closing rapidly on the last destroyer in line. At 500 yards, Gamble fired 2 torpedoes, angling them to lead the target by 30 degrees. The Mark 8 torpedoes left visible wakes of bubbles, phosphorescent trails that immediately alerted Japanese lookouts. "Gyorai! Gyorai!" Torpedoes! The destroyer's helmsman threw the wheel hard left. Both torpedoes passed astern, missing by less than 20 yards. Star shells burst overhead, illuminating the PT boats in harsh white light. 5-inch guns opened fire. Water fountained around PT-48 as Gamble zigzagged violently at full throttle. PT-46 attacked next, closing to 400 yards before firing. 1 torpedo ran erratically and missed completely. The second suffered detonator failure, bouncing off the destroyer's hull without exploding, a problem that would plague PT boats throughout the war. The boats claimed possible hits, but Japanese records show all destroyers returned safely. However, the attacks had achieved something unexpected. The destroyers were forced to jettison supplies prematurely. Minimal amounts reached shore, the first indication that PT boats could disrupt supply operations even without sinking ships. The disruption of October 13th convinced Admiral William Halsey to reinforce PT operations. By November 1942, 12 PT boats operated from Tulagi. Additional boats arrived with new tactics developed through hard experience. Intelligence had revealed the Tokyo Express schedule. The patterns were becoming predictable. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Warfield developed new tactical doctrine based on early encounters. PT boats would operate in sections of 3. One boat would fire torpedoes while others created diversions with gunfire. When torpedoes missed, which happened at least 50% of the time, guns would force destroyers to take evasive action, disrupting their supply drops. Following surface actions where American cruisers were defeated by Japanese destroyers, PT boats became one element in a broader interdiction effort. They couldn't match the firepower of destroyers. But harassment tactics forced changes in Japanese operations. PT boats patrolled the approaches to Cape Esperance, attacking supply destroyers when possible. Most torpedo attacks failed, but the constant threat forced Japanese commanders to maintain high speed. Zigzag continuously. Jettison supplies hastily. Delivery efficiency dropped below 20%. 11 Japanese destroyers approached Guadalcanal in the largest supply run to date. PT boats sortied to intercept but achieved limited success. The boats fired over 30 torpedoes without confirmed hits, illustrating the weapon's reliability problems. However, the psychological impact was significant. Japanese reports noted, "Enemy motor torpedo boats make operations extremely hazardous, must maintain constant evasive action." The harassment was working even when the weapons weren't. PT-59 achieved one of the few confirmed kills, sinking Japanese submarine I-3 as it attempted to deliver supplies. This demonstrated PT boats could be effective against slower, less maneuverable targets. Submarines couldn't execute the violent, evasive maneuvers that saved destroyers. Admiral Raizo Tanaka, Japan's most skilled destroyer commander, personally led the next supply run. His flagship, the new Akizuki-class destroyer Teruzuki, carried the latest fire control systems and rapid-fire guns. 10 additional destroyers accompanied him, 6 carrying supplies in drums. At 23:15, PT boats from Squadron 2 detected the Japanese formation off Cape Esperance. Tanaka had anticipated PT boat attacks, stationing Teruzuki as rear guard while supply destroyers moved inshore. This was the moment both sides had been building toward. PT-37 under Lieutenant Lester Gamble, PT-40 under Lieutenant John Searles, and PT-48 coordinated their approach. This was the tactic they had refined over 2 months of combat: divide enemy attention, create confusion, exploit opportunities. At 23:23, one or more PT boats fired torpedoes at Teruzuki from approximately 500 yards. Historical accounts vary between PT-37, PT-40, or PT-48 making the successful attack. At least one Mark 8 torpedo struck Teruzuki's port quarter, detonating against the steering compartment. The explosion damaged Teruzuki's rudder and propeller shaft, reducing speed to 12 knots. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks caught fire, illuminating the destroyer for miles. Admiral Tanaka was injured in the explosion, temporarily relieved of command for medical treatment. Destroyer Naganami came alongside to evacuate Admiral Tanaka and wounded crew members. The rescue operation took 30 minutes. During this time, the entire Japanese formation milled in confusion. Supply destroyers jettisoned their drums prematurely. At Oro 140 on December 12th, Teruzuki's depth charges detonated from the heat of fires. breaking the destroyer's back. She sank in 800 feet of water, becoming the largest Japanese warship definitively sunk by PT boats during World War II. The sinking of Teruzuki marked the peak of PT boat anti-destroyer operations. Though PT boats would not sink another Japanese destroyer, their cumulative impact was significant. Japanese records revealed the extent of disruption. Motor torpedo boats combined with air attacks and surface forces make night supply operations increasingly untenable. Delivery efficiency reduced below sustainable levels. Admiral Tanaka, after recovering from his injuries, continued to command but noted, "The enemy's motor torpedo boats, while rarely achieving hits, force constant evasive action that severely degrades our supply delivery capability." By January 1943, the Tokyo Express shifted to submarine and barge operations, methods even less efficient than destroyer runs. The combination of PT boat harassment, airstrikes, and surface actions had made destroyer operations unsustainable. The PT boat campaign demonstrated that naval warfare had entered a new paradigm. Multiple weapon systems working together could neutralize traditional advantages. PT boats alone rarely sank major warships, but as part of a combined arms approach, they contributed to strategic victory. Production statistics revealed the industrial equation. The United States built 531 PT boats during World War II. Each boat required 2 months to build, cost 1/30th of a destroyer. Even with high loss rates, 69 boats lost from all causes, they provided cost-effective harassment capability. Training programs at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's Training Center in Melville, Rhode Island, produced over 1,000 officers and 10,000 enlisted men. Each crew required just 8 weeks of training before deployment, compared to years needed to train destroyer crews. By mid-1943, PT boats received SO radar sets, allowing detection at 15 miles. The improved Mark 13 torpedo introduced in late 1943 increased reliability significantly. These improvements transformed PT boats into more effective combatants, though their primary role remained harassment and interdiction of smaller vessels. The Imperial Navy attempted various countermeasures with limited success. Destroyer escorts swept ahead of supply formations, but this divided their forces. Float planes dropped flares to illuminate PT boats, but this also revealed destroyer positions to other American forces. The shift to submarine supply operations proved insufficient. Submarines could carry only 20 tons of supplies compared to 200 tons for destroyers. The garrison required 400 tons daily. Mathematical defeat was inevitable. The development of armored barges for coastal supply runs represented an adaptation to PT boat threats. These slower vessels became the primary targets for PT boats from 1943 onward, where the boats achieved their greatest success against maritime logistics. PT boat service attracted volunteers seeking action. Average age 22 years. Many had never been to sea before training. They learned navigation, mechanics, and combat through intensive preparation and harsh experience. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. Living conditions were primitive. No heads. Crew used buckets. No galleys. Cold rations only. No bunks. Sleeping on deck when possible. Tropical diseases infected 80% of crews. Combat stress was intense with all crew exposed during action. Casualty rates reached 33%, higher than any other naval service, yet morale remained high. PT boat sailors knew they were elite volunteers taking extraordinary risks. They developed strong unit cohesion that transcended rank, brotherhood forged under fire. Lieutenant John Kennedy's PT 109 represented both the hazards and heroism of PT boat service. On August 2, 1943, PT 109 collided with destroyer Amagiri during a confused night action. Kennedy's leadership in saving his crew became legendary. Though the incident highlighted the extreme dangers PT boats faced against destroyers, the collision was not intentional ramming. It occurred in darkness, when neither vessel detected the other until too late. 11 of 13 crew members survived, Kennedy towing an injured sailor for hours to reach safety. The PT boat campaign revolutionized understanding of littoral warfare and asymmetric naval operations. While PT boats sank relatively few major warships, one destroyer, one submarine, and numerous barges, their harassment value exceeded their direct combat achievements. Post-war analysis revealed PT boats' primary contribution was forcing Japanese forces to adopt increasingly inefficient supply methods. The progression from destroyers to submarines to barges represented tactical victory through attrition of logistics capability. Modern fast attack craft evolved from PT boat concepts, small fast vessels using speed and surprise to engage larger opponents. The emphasis shifted from torpedoes to guided missiles, but the fundamental principle remained unchanged. In the waters around Guadalcanal, 77-foot Plywood boats had proven that integrated naval operations could overcome traditional superiority. PT boats alone could not defeat the Tokyo Express, but combined with air power, submarines, and surface forces, they contributed to cumulative attrition that proved decisive. The Japanese Navy entered the war confident in night combat supremacy. They had not anticipated that American forces would employ multiple interdependent systems, each individually vulnerable, but collectively overwhelming. Commander Tamanoi Hara, who survived multiple PT boat encounters, wrote, "The PT boats taught us that modern war requires adaptation to unconventional threats. They rarely hit us, but they never let us rest." The final accounting was strategically significant despite limited tactical success. One destroyer definitively sunk, Teruzuki. One submarine sunk, I-3. Hundreds of supply runs disrupted. Thousands of tons of supplies lost to hasty jettisoning. The cumulative effect contributed to Japanese defeat at Guadalcanal. In Iron Bottom Sound, where so many ships rest on the ocean floor, the Teruzuki lies in 800 feet of water, the only major Japanese warship definitively sunk by PT boats. Her wreck, discovered in 2024, serves as a monument to the young men who fought in small wooden boats against steel warships, proving that courage and persistence could influence strategic outcomes, even when tactical success remained limited. The Mosquito boats had demonstrated that future naval warfare would require integrated operations, technological adaptation, recognition that even small combatants could contribute to strategic victory when employed as part of comprehensive campaigns. The night waters around Guadalcanal would never again belong exclusively to any single navy. The age of combined operations had begun, and it had started with Plywood boats carrying young Americans into impossible odds against steel warships in the darkness of the Solomon Islands.